This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Andy Steele. Thanks for listening to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. The guest tonight is Dale Pierce. He's back. This time he's talking about his outreach to firefighters and what he's doing at the grassroots to reach out to mayors and fire commissioners to get justice for the 9/11 issue, the issue we talk about every week on this show, the fact that buildings 1, 2, and 7 were brought down in controlled demolitions on 9/11, and how you out there in the listening audience can become part of this great campaign. So stay tuned, and we'll be playing that interview for you in just a few minutes. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. I hope you are all with people that you love and that you're having a great time eating and drinking and just being safe. I'm going to issue the same proclamation that I did last year, and I'm going to try to turn this into a tradition on this show. It's very rare that I include little pet peeve issues into this program. We just focus on 9/11 on this show. But on Thanksgiving, I think this is important enough to just throw it in there. If you're a retail worker and you're being called away from your Thanksgiving dinner to come into work and have to preside over a crazed mob, don't put yourself in any unsafe situations. You know, even if you're getting orders, if you don't feel good about a situation that you are in, get out of it. Step out of it. You know, your life is not worth the money. It's not worth somebody else's sale. You just got to listen to that voice inside of you that tries to keep you alive, your survival instinct. I don't want to see any of you become like that poor guy. He was a Walmart worker who got trampled by the crowd that was rushing into the store. This display that we see every year in this nation on Black Friday, I think, is totally irresponsible of the corporations to promote. Puts workers in danger and puts the customers in danger, and it's something I'd like to see phased out of our culture. So I'm going to keep on issuing this proclamation every Thanksgiving until we see a more civilized class of shoppers coming into the stores on Fridays after Thanksgiving, and when we see workers allowed to enjoy the holidays with their families. Since this is the holiday, it seems kind of cliche to talk about what you're thankful for. Of course, I'm thankful for all the people out there in the 9/11 Truth Movement continuing to do the hard work, trying to get the word out to as many people as possible. And I'm thankful for all of you who continue to listen to this show, continue to give me ideas on how to make the show better, give me guest recommendations. I do read every email that I get. I can't always respond to every single one of them. I do respond sometimes, but everything you guys do, I mean, is part of this show too. We've had listeners to the show contribute theme music. It's the new theme music. And like I said, ideas and all of that. So keep it coming in. Keep telling people about the show. I'm thankful for all of you because you're all as much a part of this show as I am. All right, what we're going to do now is what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. Dale Pierce is a volunteer with AE 9/11 Truth. He's worked in high-rise buildings in Houston and San Francisco, and he's got a pretty good understanding of how they are constructed. He's been a firefighter also, and last February he was on the show to talk about his son Noah Pierce, who was a former U.S. soldier in Iraq who suffered severe PTSD and who tragically took his own life, like many soldiers who've come back from these wars have done. So we talked about that. Now, Dale has done a lot of great work in the service of humanity over the past many years, including outreach to firefighters on the issue of 9/11 Truth, which we'll be talking about today. Dale, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Andy, it's a pleasure to be here.
Now, for new audience members, can you recap on how you came awake to the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence and why you are so tireless in helping to expose the reality of this issue?
It's a little more complicated than most people would comprehend. Basically, it starts with my mother being 9 years old, resident of Berlin when the Nazis took over. So she survived 363 bombing raids and the invasion of the Russians, the British, and the Americans and everything else, and fled to America with my dad, who was a U.S. soldier. So as an early child, I heard what fascists was like and how they behaved. And I started recognizing the same type of language here in the United States, racism and ignorance and bigotry. And it was quite interesting childhood, going from at Christmas with my mother's side of the family from Germany, and then my dad's side of the family from South Texas. And I heard a lot of the same language, which was really disturbing. So later in life, in college, I really had skeptical doubts about being able to pull off a 30-year career, going to college and the retirement and the whole house and family. I figured we're going to either blow ourselves up or our paradise would be paved over by the time I retired. So I decided to, after I got out of firefighting service, I became a commercial diver and was trained in saturation diving and worked in the Gulf of Mexico. That came to an end, and I ended up on the west coast of California being a sea urchin diver. So, make a long story short, I started pondering what happened back on the oil fields of Texas. I left under bad conditions. I was on an oil rig that obviously had malfunctions that were obvious, and the company didn't care. It was kind of like Deepwater Horizon, just simply get the job done and pay the fines, and any fatalities are just called accidents and pay off the family. So that was my first introduction to foreign policy, by studying what we were doing in other countries, and I slowly became shocked. Over the next 10 years of learning this, you become quite isolated as you learn our foreign policy and how the difference is with how people perceived reality by watching television and the local news. 2 days before September 11th, I had finished Calmears Johnson's book, Blowback, explaining our situation of foreign policy, specifically Afghanistan, and some of the liability we could be suffering from then. And then 2 days later, on September 11th, it hit. My training as a firefighter immediately perked me up. I mean, I'm seeing things that shouldn't be there. But, you know, as the event was just so massive and the confusion, I kind of went with the Calmears Johnson's book that this was blowback. This happened because of our foreign policy, and it just didn't make sense. I was seeing obvious red signs, but, you know, my mind was reinforcing what my beliefs were, and that was this was blowback. 2 days later, my son joins the military. So my nightmare turned to Iraq, and the next 5 years of my life was consumed with that. After my son's death, I was approached by an attorney and explained his research on September 11th, and that I needed to look into it to really figure out what was going on. And you could just feel this cold chill go down your spine as reality set in, as he, you know, told me the few corporations involved and all the things we're looking at now. So after receiving therapy and coming to grips of how incredibly cruel this situation is, I became more and more involved, and eventually was confronted with living on the run the rest of my life or doing something about it. And it was when I saw architects and engineers put up those billboards in New York City. That was just too bold and too incredible to see this small group of people achieving something like that. So I just simply had to join. So here I am.
here you are, and we're a lot better for it. And, that small group of people is getting bigger and bigger all the time, as you've proven, and as we see more people taking an interest in this issue. Now, since the last interview, you've been doing a lot of stuff, particularly your outreach with firefighters. Can you tell us what you've been doing and kind of what your work has entailed?
I had a lot to catch up to do. I was 16 years old when they allowed kids basically to join California Division of Forestry as seasonal forest firefighters. So I was trained in fire science, crime preservation, then immediately shipped onto the front lines. 17 years old, and you're fighting vicious fires. So with that training, I had the basics to understand that major violations that have occurred. So I spent the last year with AE calling firefighters and every other contact I could and put together the whole picture of what it is we're dealing with. And my discoveries are quite disturbing. It's so few people are exploring this. Everywhere you look, you just find things that just literally set you back with a gasp and wonder, how could this be? But we like to stick to the facts in this business, but we've got to do some speculation, and when the parts start fitting together, you can see we are truly up against a well-organized and ruthless machine.
Well, it's an uphill battle, no doubt, but we are strong enough to fight it. And we talk about it every week on this show. I begin to sound like a broken record when I talk about the media blockade on this issue, and of course the stonewalling from politicians. Now, you've seen particular stonewalling and self-censorship in firehouses, haven't you, from the conversations we've had? Can you describe some of your experiences, things you've witnessed when you've tried to do that kind of outreach?
It leaves you bewildered to see trained professionals act in such literally a childish manner. It's like trying to talk to Bill Cosby about his sex life. I hate to make the comparison, but until recently, firefighters would not, and they cannot talk about operational procedures. We've got to explore exactly why is it so hush-hush. It's definitely not doing them good. So yeah, the resistance has just been belief, and to be perfectly honest, the only firefighters I've talked to that can speak in a professional manner about the incident are the ones that have signed our petition. When I meet firefighters and talk to them, I'm hearing every type of excuse you could imagine for September 11th. One fireman told me that Building 7 apparently jumped up into the air after 1 and 2 came down and twisted, and that's why it collapsed like it did. Another firefighter I was having lunch with was extremely embarrassed to even talk about it. He was looking all around like, what is people going to think of us? And he just simply said, look, this was obviously very well orchestrated, and it's quite embarrassing. Can't we just, move on? Recently, I talked to a firefighter from San Francisco. His excuse was just, we simply can't talk about it, retired or active. We can no longer talk about any situation. I'm not sure when that came around. Firefighters I've talked to that retired before September 11th are a little more free to talk about it. He finally, when I asked him, when you're sitting around the firehouse and you're seeing these buildings collapse, and there's black smoke with hardly any fires, but there's gray smoke, there's people jumping out. Aren't you asking any questions? There's a 1,000-degree temperature discrepancy we've got here as firefighters. And he blurted out, it was only 750 degrees. I'm like, well, only 750 degrees? That puts us in a whole new category. Really, 750 degrees, tell that to the IRS when they're questioning you on your taxes. They're going to frown at the very least. So we went on with our conversation, and he just simply stated he cannot talk about September 11th, and he was having a drink with me at the bar, so I took his smartphone and showed him the the advertisement we played at the beach on the 911 Rekindled. The poor guy, he was just floored. He said, "You did what? You called out the firefighters on a Rekindle?" And he was so staggered, he just refused to talk and said, "Give me your material. I'll review the law, and we will have a conversation in the firehouse." And that was the end of our conversation. So the new way that I'm able to reach firefighters and get them engaged is you just simply, if you dive into 911, it's too much for them. You have to ask them to get them emotionally involved, and that is, look, if we're going to go with the NIST report that a building can collapse due to small office fires, we need to account for it. We need a manual on how to deal with this. And actually, if we're really doing our job, what we'd have to do is red tag every building throughout the world that's made of steel in a high-rise manner to figure out what happened to this building. If it came down in 6.5 seconds and it takes a firefighter about a minute per floor to go up, you can't even get up to the first floor, let alone up and out. So what do we do? And in some of my investigations, I found the Deputy Chief Peter Hayden of the New York Fire Department stated that they consulted with an engineer when number 7 was on fire. And this engineer told them, "You've got about 5 hours before that building collapses." And he bragged that the guy was dead on. 5 hours and 20 minutes later, it collapsed. Well, boy, we sure could use that engineer and figure out what line of engineering is that and what crystal ball did he have. And then more disturbing is Chief Negro, I believe his name is. He made the statement that the hardest decision in his whole life was to pull back firefighters from number 7 and put a perimeter up even during search and rescue operations and wait for the collapse. These are damning statements here because it's never happened before, and if that is the case, normal citizens have the right to ask their fire departments, "Hey, we have a high-rise building in our city, and if I have to go in there to pay my taxes or go to the bank or whatever, is it up to us to get out if a fire catches on fire, or can we depend on the fire department?" I mean, this is so embarrassing that my fear is that when historians start digging through this, they're going to wonder what on God's earth happened to these people. So this is very sensitive information. It's very damning to some of these, to our fire departments. It's been 13 years and they still don't have a manual. One of our slogans is, "Let no man's ghost come back to haunt you for lack of training." Well, we're a long ways from that slogan because we don't have a manual and we haven't red tagged any buildings. So we're literally painted into a corner. And if you ever read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and how writers really, really poked fun at the idiocy of the Nazis, like, for instance, during the bombing of Berlin, they had shot down a P-51 Mustang in Berlin, and the reality of that to the Luftwaffe generals was the end of the war. This long-range fighter escort met their doom, and that didn't fit with their worldview, so they had to make it disappear. And after they tried to theorize that the thing was shot down in France and glided all the way to Berlin, on and on and on, he finally ordered his generals just simply to ignore it. So that's what we're doing with number 7. We're just simply ignoring, and the cognitive dissonance is just stunning. I'm going to be going to some fire conferences this summer, and I fully expect to run across a lot of firefighters that can't even comprehend that something like this would happen. So therefore, it's just simply impossible regardless of our facts.
I've talked many times about the second tragedy of 9/11, beyond the deaths that day, beyond the wars. It's just a simple fact that the real perpetrators, whoever planted explosives in those buildings, and whoever continues to cover it up, has made America have to live with this secret. And it's not the secret of the American people. It's not the American people's crime. America didn't do this to itself in that sense. But they've created this situation now where our government has invested so much in this one particular event, And so many people have invested themselves emotionally. Soldiers who lost limbs and came home, their lives are radically transformed forever now because of 9/11, because they rushed to go join the war after 9/11 happened. Everyone's got so much emotionally invested in this that now we've got this open or not so open secret about this event. When you actually see the evidence that people have to go through that mental trauma and stress of trying to lie to themselves. Like you cited that firefighter who said the building jumped up in the air. And, that can sound funny if this was a cartoon or something fictional, but this is real life. This is tragic. This shows the neurosis that 9/11 has inflicted upon our country. So, again, this just further illustrates that second tragedy of 9/11 that I always talk about. Now, you mentioned earlier about accusing the firefighters of a rekindle, and that's significant. I want our audience to understand the power in that message. You don't really understand that unless you are a firefighter. Can you talk about what you guys did at the beach and what the significance of that rekindle word means to firefighters?
Rekindle means basically you didn't finish the job. You left and there was a spark that when you went home and were filling out your reports that came back to life, and the structure or forest or whatever caught back on fire. It's very embarrassing. It happens, but it's just one of those things you don't want on your record. So to say that is just, like I said, it left this firefighter just dazzled. He could not believe it. He couldn't comprehend it. What he thought is September 11th has been settled. It's been gone over, that's ridiculous, and how dare you do this? He just couldn't believe it, but he had to respect me for the way I put it. So what it is, it was the 122nd annual Firemen's Convention for the Cumberland Volunteer Valley Fire Department. They are a 5-state agency that started back in the 1800s to hook up different fire departments so their couplings would all fit one another so they could reinforce each other during fires for the railroads. And they came up to be this 5-state agency that has taken over ethics for the fire departments. They wrote a white paper on firefighter behavior and basically laid out the ethics for firefighters to abide by. So we simply approached them with a massive billboard mounted on the back of a boat. It was a 72-foot catamaran with a huge 47 by 14-foot digital video screen, and the convention was on the beach of Ocean City, Maryland. There was 35,000 firefighters in attendance with their families, over 100,000 people on the beach, along with a military air show. And the boat went up and down the beach, showing number 7 collapsing, saying it rekindled, and directed the firefighters and beachgoers to our website. And they're so protected with the belief of the official story, they just simply ignored and didn't even bother to make a single statement on Facebook. So firefighters are just not ready for this reality, and it's staring them in the face.
And of course, the metaphorical meaning here, the meaning is that obviously, the rubble didn't catch back on fire on 9/11. It burned for weeks, and obviously you had extremely high temperatures that melted steel. But the significance of using the word rekindle was that the issue was never dealt with, that the fire of 9/11 itself, the burning house of our country, was never put out. All right, so that it's basically accusing them of a rekindle by ignoring this very important issue. So that's very powerful.
That's exactly it. The fire departments normally work hand in hand with other agencies. In the 93 bombing, they worked hand in hand with the FBI, and they literally, every bit of material went through a flour shifter, looking for as little as paint chips. This stuff was immediately hauled off. So there was no 921 report of what caused the fire. There was evidence of molten steel, temperatures above what office temperatures can give. We had witnesses. All that was ignored. So the fire departments basically let NIST do the final investigation claiming that the building collapsed due to small office fires, and indeed it reached free fall for what was it, the first 8 floors. So, this is saying firefighters didn't finish their job. They should have investigated for explosives. They should have determined the true cause. So at this point, we have no manual. The job is unfinished. That's a rekindle. That's what we meant by it.
That's right. And, we've talked before just privately about the media's role in causing strife within firehouses. The way I see the media in this particular case, I sort of look at it as a sadistic clown after a child's been brutally traumatized. We were all traumatized that day watching those buildings come down, firefighters in particular. I remember a firefighter on that very day who was being interviewed. This is after the first of the Twin Towers went down, and the reporter was asking him, are you going back in? Because he was suiting up to go back in the building. And the firefighter said, I have to go back in. I got some of my fellow brother officers in there. I have to. And I could see it in his eyes. This really stuck with me, even to this day, is that you would think he's trying to convince the reporter, but he doesn't have to convince the reporter of anything. What he was doing is convincing himself, because no matter how strong you are, no matter how, courageous you are, you're still going to be afraid. And I know he was afraid. I don't know if he died or not, but he went back into the towers, and it was like when he was saying, there's my fellow officers, I have to go back in, he was saying it to himself. He was pushing himself to go do that. So our firefighters were traumatized that day, and I kind of look at the media itself as being, just imagine a situation where you have a kid who's been horribly traumatized by some sick person, after he's taken out of this room where that's happened, being brought into another room where he's crying, tears are running down his face, and now you have this clown, patting him on the back and handing him a cookie and putting him in a seat in front of a birthday cake, and now he's like in this celebratory position. Immediately after 9/11, our firefighters were celebrated as heroes, and they are heroes, but it was done in the light of patriotism, nationalism, and mixed in with the post-9/11 world agenda. So they're being complimented off of this horrible trauma, and their heroics, the work that they did on that day, is being mixed in with the foreign policy aims of the White House, with the clampdown on civil liberties, all of these things that were sold to us in the following year afterwards, so that when people look at these heroes, these firefighters, they also think of the federal government's foreign agenda too. So it was all mixed together. Essentially, a lot of the bad stuff that went with 9/11 got wrapped in with their heroism and got intermingled, and now you have this situation where firefighters don't want to even look at the reality, at the physics and forensic evidence about what really happened on 9/11 because it seems to attack America itself in their minds, and everybody's minds, really, but in theirs. I just want to get your commentary on that, on what I just said.
Yeah, they just cherry-picked all the rah-rah stuff. Obviously, they left out the firefighters talking about explosions and film of the molten metal. They showed number 7 only going down once, and then they made guys like Bill O'Reilly. Then all of a sudden we got Michael Savage replacing Phil Donahue on MSNBC. I mean, Michael Savage, here's a guy that's an admitted felon. So they just made a fortune off of slamming anyone that would question anything but the original conspiracy theorist. And so legitimate firefighters, people that were trained as fire marshals, that are witnesses to the molten metal, to the explosions, to all sorts of ongoings that should be investigated, were just neutralized, simply neutralized. When Larry Silverstein made that statement, I consulted with the fire department, we decided there was so much loss of life, and the building was so engulfed, we decided to pull it. Well, that's a damning statement in itself, and I believe he corrected himself by saying, we meant pull the firefighters. Well, fire departments don't consult with the owners of buildings, and if they did and the building collapsed and you get your insurance money, things come to my mind like fire fraud. So where was our news media asking these questions? No, they simply did it for ratings and rah, 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 and look what guys like Bill O'Reilly and Michael Savage are making off of us. You know, I'm talking to firefighters that with all the legal and health issues they had, they still are not doing well financially. I'm having to support my travels to these events, and I'm not getting much help from other firefighters on joining me. So they've really put a hamper on firefighters being able to talk in a professional manner. I mean, next thing they'd know, they'd have their picture on Sean Hannity or Michael's, or Bill O'Reilly's show, and not much you could do about it. So they've just put a clamp on this, and what's going on now inside the firehouses is they all have the training to understand that something serious happened that day. So you've got different groups. Some just can't even comprehend, but they know something's wrong. Others know. And it's like a big rotten elephant in every firehouse throughout the United States. The tensions are built in. Some firehouses, you just simply can't even discuss it. There's a policy of it. There's been fistfights. People have lost their jobs. Very inappropriate behavior on social media. And all this has been created by the mainstream media, particularly the Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity's, of pointing fingers and screaming and yelling and never discussing the facts, just opinions and how dare you incriminate our government, blah, 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 when we've got so much overwhelming evidence. So my fear is, how is history going to judge this? And if you know how after World War II the war didn't end, the children of those Nazis and people in that regards were dealt with by their children. And I see a day when these kids are going to be asking, Daddy, where were you after September 11th when we lost our country and you didn't say anything? So I really feel for these firefighters. They found themselves one day in a situation of a job, a family, bills, and what are you going to do besides being a firefighter? And now you're being asked to ignore signs of wrongdoing. So that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I feel for these guys, but at the same point, you got to speak up. When I was a firefighter, as a forest firefighter, I discovered right off that what we're doing was we were putting out the fires that normally burn every 4 to 7 years through a forest, and now we've got over 100 years of fuel accumulated. Well, I brought that up at dinner one time, and you could hear a pin drop. It was just like, how dare you question what we do? And I'm like, well, this kind of goes against what we're supposed to be doing, is protecting the populations, because instead of controlling these fires and letting them burn, we should at least discuss it, or maybe burn during the winter. We're letting the fuel accumulate. And I really lost my appetite for firefighting after that event. So I made a conscious decision to go elsewhere for employment. And I don't know. I wouldn't want to be in these firemen's position to say, well, I couldn't get another job or I couldn't do that. But, when they're making statements like, well, it's only 750-degree temperature differential, I feel for their future. It's going to be tough.
While you're talking and describing the environment following the 9/11 event, I think of it almost like a relationship. The relationship between the American people and its establishment. And when I say establishment, I refer to media, government, all of the authorities that we look to, especially during times of crisis. And relationships that are not good, relationships that are not doing well, is one where people can't openly communicate and share thoughts on certain things. We don't talk about this in our home. We don't go there. We don't. There's certain subjects that we just can't broach, or there's going to be a big screaming match. And what 9/11 created was a dysfunctional relationship between the people and the establishment they look to for protection. Obviously, that's not a good place to be. But just looking at that, when I describe the bad relationship of no communication, that's easier for people to understand. They can look at that from the outside and agree with that. But on a macro scale, America is in that situation right now. It's the exact same thing, and this reflects in the firehouses, because what you described, Bill O'Reilly going after anybody that talks about this, creates divisions. And a firefighter that may want to speak out will have these concerns you listed, about losing their job, losing prestige, whatever. And so at that point, the cover-up is maintained, not even because of a conspiracy, quote-unquote, but because of just self-censorship. People are afraid to go there. The environment is not free for people to express their ideas and their thoughts on the issue.
Yeah, Americans are pretty much educated by television, and my mother described what happened in Berlin. You could visually see the small concentration camps. You knew the Gestapo was hauling people off and doing what they wanted. The black smoke was coming out, and if you brought up, the rumors and the visual evidence, you were just laughed at by the general population. There was just a small percentage that really got it. So the whole population just went along with what they were told over the radio. There they would use the death sentence if you were caught listening to alternative radio like the BBC. Here we just have, the rich have bought it all up, and so we've got 150 channels of the same small group of billionaires and their opinions. So yeah, we have got a population that's basically creating their reality from what they see on television, and they will warp reality to make it fit. For instance, I've talked to multiple engineers. It's amazing. They will state, look, I'm an engineer, and as an engineer, I've investigated September 11th, and what it is, those two towers had no core structure. They were built what they call hollow steel tubing, because, they gave the name of hollow steel tubing to the construction type, which is like calling the Golden Gate Bridge made out of string or something like that. So he stated, that makes perfect sense why the building collapsed like it did. There was no structural support on the inside. And I said, well, what about the 47 box columns? And they just couldn't even talk about it. One of them threw me out of his house, and the other one just simply went on to, well, how's your business? And I finally made him a bet, hey, let's make a big wager on that. You got your cell phone right there. We can Google core columns images, and I'll show you. He wouldn't go there. So unfortunately, people will avoid the physical evidence. It's a well-known fact. They studied this with when the Nazis were in Nuremberg trials, that once the emotional brain is engaged, the blood has left the rational side of the brain, and you just simply go with emotions instead of being rational, and that has been driving our country for the last 13 years. But as I get around, it's amazing the openings that I'm getting and how many people can literally talk about how they've caught on. When I was asked to lead this group of firefighters for AE, I had no skills in this manner. I've been working offshore most of my life, so I joined Toastmasters to learn how to lead and learn how to speak, and that has opened up a world of opportunity for me. Using the groups, you can go to each group 3 times for free, and there's a dozen in the Bay Area. So I give speeches, just a 5 to 7 minute speech, and I influence other Toastmasters to start acting and speaking and going into fire stations, going before the mayor and asking their fire commissioner, where is your fire plan?
Well, this is what I always encourage people to do, and this is why I like your outreach and your self-training, because that's what you do. If you don't have a particular skill, you go out and acquire it. And so, there's so many people that put off doing something. They say, well, I couldn't do that. I could never, for instance, speak in front of a large crowd. I'd get scared. I don't know how to do it. Well, that's why you learn how to do it. And there's opportunities for you to do that, like Toastmasters, like you said, but anybody can teach themselves a skill. I mean, when I started this show, I didn't know anything about putting together a podcast. I didn't know how to be a radio host, but you learn as you go along. You make things happen. You don't have to be an expert on something in order to do it. The most important thing is to engage the issue as much as you can in whatever way you can. I mean, you want to make sure your facts are straight and show a little caution so that you have a good product, but you don't hold yourself back because you're afraid, because you're not the numero uno person at doing a particular thing at the moment. Nobody's expecting you to be the best in any situation. The important thing is to be truthful and create as much resistance as you can. Now, what can our audience do to help you in reaching out to firefighters? Because obviously that is a group that we need to be reaching out more to. What can our audience do? How can they lend their support to your efforts?
What we have is a chain of command, and as we know, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So in looking how the chain of command works, you go from firefighter to chief to captain, and then you've got your mayor, then your governor, and then the president. So looking at the weak link, it is the mayor with his fire commissioner. If you simply went into a town hall meeting, you get 2 minutes to speak at the podium to the city council. You could ask the mayor just very simply, hey, there's the original story. The number 7 collapsed in 6.5 seconds due to small office fires, and we have all these buildings that people could become trapped in, and we need to know, what is your plan? Are you going to rescue us? It'd be you wouldn't even have to go ahead and talk about the conspiracy and 911's an inside job. Just simply ask them, where is your manual? And if you don't have a manual, you should be red tagging it. I can guarantee you the fire commissioner will be red in the face. So what I'm working on now is a leaflet program, what we call wild pull tab postings. And one of our first we're going to put out is called Let's Protect Our Protectors. And that talks about how firefighters don't have a manual. It's forbidden for them to talk about September 11th. The news medias are creating this environment, and therefore we need to unplug Fox News out of the fire stations until we get a manual. So if we put these flyers up and down the avenues where our firehouses are, the neighbors of the firehouses will start to get educated, just like what you did on Washington Journal. You kept calling in with a simple question that involves 6th grade physics. And even though all our congressmen and generals and senators were laughing, the viewers weren't. And as time went on, as we know, we finally realized that we pretty much owned that program by training the populace that was listening to it, the viewers, on 6th grade physics. And once they started calling in, we owned it. So at this point, what we can do is the same thing. We can educate the neighbors of firefighters that can start going in and questioning the mayor, and something will have to give. It's got the potential to go viral on here. They can't defend this. It's evolved to the point where it's down to the very synthesis of what September is all about. And that is, if you're going to go with the original story, then we need to red tag these buildings and figure out why they collapsed. I mean, guarantee if you go into city limits and have a barbecue illegally, they will come and shut you down and red tag you or your restaurant or whatever. So we need to ask them, what is the next evolution of our plan? And they don't have one. And the time for laughing, joking, and brushing us off is gone. They have to react to this. So it could be quite easy. It's going to be exciting as we put this program together, because for an average person, all they have to do is start putting up these posters. And we've got some great ones. For instance, Caltrans, the California Transportation Department, they were having trouble with their workers being hit by vehicles. And the advertisement wasn't working, so they used a little child, like 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid dressed in his father or mother's Caltrans uniforms and says, hey, slow down, that's my mom working there. So one of the posters I came up with was using a model to be a symbol of a child that lost his father or mother in the high-rise as a firefighter. And it shows this little kid in an oversized firefighter's outfit, and it says, 911 made me man of my house. And it goes on, my dad died on 911 and your dad could be next because we don't have a manual. And it's got a little pull tab. Stuff like that will make its way into the firehouses. And as they're driving up and down the road and they see these things, it will really start to wear on them, because the tensions are red hot right now anyways. And now that they know that the neighbors are educating And when you go in before a mayor, I can imagine just a few people can really cause some heartaches and some, hopefully some action, some movement in these fire departments. We saw what you were able to do with Washington Journal. Our supporters can have the same type of power with this type of grassroots movement. You've got to own the streets. And with these pull tab flyers, the trick is to these things, you want it to be intriguing, a call to action, and looking non-commercial. So some of the things we have are brilliant for that. I really look forward to getting our volunteers involved in this, empowering them to take our country back.
I love the way that you characterized, all the campaigns you mentioned, from C-SPAN to what you're doing, and essentially what it does, these kinds of actions, is it boils down the issue to some very common sense questions, like you said, the 9th grade physics. But yeah, if fire really caused this building to break down, why haven't there been any major changes to the building codes? Why hasn't there been more of an alarm raised over the implications of the official story that, firefighters could be in a burning building with some minor fires in it and have the building come crashing down on their head? And when you do that, and like you said, they may laugh, but the audience isn't. That's why C-SPAN worked. That's why what Ted Walter did over in New York with the high-rise safety initiative also, was so brilliant, because all it's doing is asking for a new investigation of Building 7, not talking about any particular conspiracy or anything like that, or blaming it on pre-planted explosives, just saying, hey, when buildings fall down, we need to know why this happens. And even though strings get pulled and the judicial system doesn't always work, people see this. And when Mayor de Blasio says he's going to do everything he can to block it, people on the fence say, hey, that's strange. Why is he so afraid of democracy? So again, what you're talking about doing is very smart, falls in line with these previous successful efforts, and I think that we should all be getting behind that. How can people get in touch with you and find out how to help, get information, download whatever they need to download?
Monitor rethink911.org. We will be Rudy Dent, from New York Fire Department, that was there on September 11th. We will be putting out talking points and our plan and call to action. So we're working on that now, role-playing with Rudy on how we do this. It's bulletproof. You cannot argue against it. As soon as you get off topic, we get to say, hey, that's why we have no manual, because we're not dealing with the fact that we need to deal with the facts, not with emotions. I gave a speech the other day, and a woman listened to me, and she goes, oh, my God. She goes, that just simply can't be true, because if it is, we're screwed. So, here, 6th grade physics doesn't make any difference at all, because the reality of it just really sucks. And the poor woman, she's still just like, she looks at me and she's just, her hair just like frizzles, and she knows it's true, but she can't go there. It's pretty stunning. So watch what we come up with on Rethink 911. We will come up with simple solutions. It was such a big event, so scattered, people would just run this way and run that way with different ideas and theories and calling us conspiracy theorists when all they're asking is questions of theories. So we got it down to this simple thing. Hey, if this is the way it is, we either need to red tag buildings or have a manual immediately. So you can't argue against it. It's indefensible. I really look forward to this. We can empower just the average person to take a stroll every morning and put up these flyers. Take, 20, 30 of them and put them up. And let me tell you, before long, it'll spread like wildfire, because people are catching on. They are really catching on. And the ones that are sitting in coffee shops and restaurants both in the mornings and boasting everything they heard on Fox News are slowly being marginalized and confronted with the facts. I got tired of listening to stuff in restaurants, and I would just simply, because we gather there every morning, I simply would talk to people that were like-minded and won over the whole restaurant, where we were able to stop that type of conversation. So you simply have to get involved. Like you said, you don't have to be an expert. When I joined AE, I've taken my weakest point is, and that's only I have a high school education. For instance, when I was at the AIA convention with Richard, I was talking to architects, and I could look for body language there. My mom told me before I went, how they'll ignore us, and look for body language. And when you see the stink eye, talk to them. That's where you're going to get your lively conversations. And it was amazing to walk along with these guys through the convention, asking them questions about Building 7, and have them turn around and say something really derogatory, like, "Look, you guys are just a bunch of jerks, and your stuff is garbage." And you're like, "Well, you're a licensed architect. If you speak like that, you've got to have some research." And the reality is, I'm a fireman, and your buildings that were rated not to collapse under those conditions collapsed, killing my firefighters. And maybe you're not wanting to talk about it, but I do. And it was amazing, some of the meltdowns I saw. And eventually, because of those, I had to explain myself to the management, and it was great. We went into the manager's quarters there, and were able to show them on our little smartphones Building 7 collapsing. And I stated, when I walk through here and I hear architects, they don't even know about the biggest event in their history, our history, and they have no ability to talk about simple sixth grade physics. And I said, I've only got a high school education here. This is not a good thing. And then I would eventually say, it started off with architects and engineers asking questions. Now I'm a firefighter, but I also lost my son in the Iraq War. And I'm starting to see a connection between Building 7 and Iraq. So now we need to deal with this before you have soldiers walking through here or running their wheelchairs through here asking those questions. So it was quite a great meeting there. On the way out, I got to run into two of the board members there and had the same conversation with them. And they're just so isolated from this happening, but in the back of their mind, you could just see their wheels spinning. So we are making incredible inroads. I'm sure they had discussions on that, just like when you did your Washington Journal. I sent them a New Year's greeting, how it definitely wasn't fun getting up on the West Coast at 4 a.m., but it was worth it to watch them sweat out the fact that they couldn't talk about the biggest event in our history. And it was going to be a great year watching this, and I wish you the best of luck. And to be truthful, it's just wonderful to collect all this compilated videotape of you guys distorting reality. I said historians are going to have a lovely time with this, so keep it up. You're giving us more good information. And then I introduced them to why I felt that way about my son. So I'm sure we've really turning some heads, and obviously, as we got Richard on with that, or you did, I should say.
No, we all did, and I remember when you called in too. I didn't even have anything to do with it. You got up at 4 in the morning. That was the first thing I thought. Wow, Dale's up very early, but I was very happy you did. Now, moving on to because you mentioned the Iraq War, and I wanted to kind of get into this. And one of my biggest concerns always is that we're going to see another new Pearl Harbor. Something else is going to happen. I'm always very aware of an invisible ticking clock behind me before something happens that prevents me from having this show, from being able to reach the listeners, who like this program, people who follow AE 9/11 Truth. I asked Phil Restino of Veterans for Peace this. I'm going to ask you, what would you say to young guys out there, folks who think they're missing out on something, who want to join the military for whatever reason, patriotic, career? What would you have to say to young men?
Do your research. Find out what is really going on. Ask all questions. This is your life, and it is disposable. Once they own you, they can do what they want. For instance, my son was in the initial invasion in Baghdad. He fought through Fallujah. He went through a living nightmare. And the war crimes that he committed make Abu Ghraib look like a high school prank, to be honest. And we know the horrors of Abu Ghraib. What my son was involved in was pretty universal throughout the military. They were torturing animals before they went on patrol so they could basically be desensitized when they had to do the killing that was required of them in their house raids. They had committed so many crimes that I knew they weren't going to let them back here. So they just simply redlined all the 3rd Infantry until there wasn't nothing left to do the winter soldier stuff. And the ones that survived, they were given water directly out of the Tigris River. Depleted uranium, dead bodies, raw sewage floating through the river. It just absolutely destroyed these kids' bodies. No questions asked. Nobody was prosecuted. I don't think that was a mistake. They wanted these kids out of existence just because I know the crimes my son committed. And it breaks my heart when I see people that have joined up after my son has died and have gone through the same process and have committed suicide or ended up in jail for killing someone here in the U.S., and they did the exact same thing. All you had to do, you got so dysfunctional and so angry about these guys just eating us up with IEDs, all you had to do was go out on patrol, shoot off an AK-7 into a microphone, say you're under attack, and you could go raid and rape and rob at will. They wanted drugs, guns, opiates, and women. So these kids that think you're going in there to fight for Uncle Sam, that's not it. I mean, we have to change the language. I'm not going to hold back anymore. Soldiers was heroic signing up, but they're not heroes. They're victims, and we need to address them as such. They're victims of a system that simply uses our money and our loved ones to grab resources and let us live off of a trickle-down economy. So I know that's hard, but my dad fought in the Hurricane Forest where we lost 38,000 men, and for decade after decade after decade I watched my dad suffer. And he finally admitted at the end, he goes, them people on Wall Street were pretty smart. They got us kids to fight out in the woods, use all those resources, and stick the taxpayer with the bill. So if my dad could figure it out, the rest of us should. But it's a shame that he had to wait till he's on deathbed to cop to that.
Well, Dale, you are doing amazing work. I love whenever you come on this program. You've got so much tremendous insight and life experience to share with our audience. I know we're going to have you on again, and please keep me updated on what you're doing with this firefighter effort. I see good things coming out of it, and we're going to keep our audience updated on what you're doing and how they can help. But again, Dale, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Andy, it's been a pleasure. Anytime.
This program airs every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.